Welcome to another edition of the Inspired Stories podcast, where leaders share their experiences so we can learn from their successes and be inspired by how they've overcome adversity. My name is Anthony Codispoti, and today's guest is Philip Viar, CEO and President of Independence Care. They operate 30 independent, privately owned home care agencies across multiple states, focusing on non-medical services through Medicaid waiver and managed Medicaid insurance programs. Their mission is to serve clients with compassion and help them maintain independence in their lives. They also offer specialized support for Alzheimer's and dementia care, transportation, and personal assistance. Under Philip's leadership, Independence Care has expanded its reach and will introduce mobile health home parks in 2025. Now, he previously served as CEO at the Avondale Care Group, where he honed his expertise in the home care industry. Philip is recognized for his strategic vision and serves on various boards that promote healthcare and community support. His passion for innovation drives him to seek new ways to improve care for those who need it most. Now, before we get into all that good stuff, today's episode is brought to you by my company, Add Back Benefits Agency, where we offer very specific and unique employee benefits that are both great for your team and fiscally optimized for your bottom line. One recent client was able to add over $900 per employee per year in extra cash flow by implementing one of our innovative programs. Results vary for each company, and some organizations may not be eligible. To find out if your company qualifies, contact us today at addbackbenefitsagency.com. Now, back to our guest today, the CEO and President of Independence Care. Philip, I appreciate you making the time to share your story today.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Anthony. I really appreciate it. I'm excited
So let's jump into it. Let's just do it. Let's go back early days before Independence Care was even started. How were you drawn into this industry in the first place?
Well, it's an interesting story, and I guess drawn in, thrown in, however you want to categorize it. But my mother-in-law, Lorna, she owned a home care agency in New York City. And they had been in New York City since 2001. They actually, they worked with a company, Brookdale. I think they may be the largest senior living company in the country, but if not, very close. And they were working inside of a Brookdale building up in Quincy, Massachusetts, providing home care as the preferred provider in the building. And Brookdale was building a beautiful building down in Battery Park, right around the corner from the World Trade Center, Stuyvesant High School, if you're familiar with New York City at all. And it was a beautiful building, and they were looking for somebody to come in and be the preferred provider. My understanding is they didn't have assisted living licenses in New York back then, so they were looking for a home care agency to provide those services. So they had interviewed people in New York, and people in New York can be very pushy and demanding, and so people were like, well, this is how we're going to do it. And they're $1 billion company. They were looking for more of somebody who's willing to be told what to do. It may be. And so and then I don't know, unions, I don't think they tried to stay away from that. So long story short, they asked my mother-in-law and her business partner, Peter, to come down to New York, apply for their home care license, and be the preferred provider in the building. So Lorna filled out the application. She brought it all the way to the state in Albany, right on the director's desk, and he looked at it and said, "Oh my God, we gave you the wrong application." And so the waiting period was very long at that point, maybe 3 years. He was very helpful. He was also retiring. So on the way out the door, he helped Lorna get their license quickly, I wish I could remember his name, because Lorna's always thanking him anytime she tells the story about Avondale. And so
she was able to bypass that 3-year waiting period.
Yes. And they were doing Medicare and Medicaid up in Massachusetts, and it was a little bit different in New York. So they had gotten the certified agency application, which is this big, versus the one that they should have gotten, which was this big. So the guy, he felt bad and figured on the way out the door, I'll do something nice for this lady. So he was very helpful. And then they got the license. They moved into the building August 12th, maybe August 15th, 2001, September 11th, 2001, less than a month later. It was obviously complete disaster. They were had to get everybody out. They hot wired a school bus. It's just, everyone has a crazy story about that day
Wow.
in the months that followed. So, everyone moved to various different places. And I think it was 4 months later, they started to move back in. At this point, the business was, the business was not doing well, obviously because of what was happening. And so I think they were considering leaving New York. Thankfully, they didn't, because they ended up getting things going there, long story short. And then they started working with Atria, which is another huge senior living company, doing essentially the same thing, having an office in the building, being the preferred provider. And they have worked in Atria building
So
up in
sorry,
Riverdale.
Philip, just to interrupt for a second. So I understand
Yeah,
how that works. So they've got an office in a bricks and mortar facility where like a nursing
right.
home facility.
Yep,
And when people are ready to leave that facility and go home, most of those folks, a lot of those folks still need some kind of help. They need some kind of in-home care. And so
right.
you're there, or she was there in that building to sort of be the preferred provider and say, hey, we can help you make that transition. Am I understanding that right?
Right. So we would provide, mostly non-medical, but, we did a little bit of skilled care, but mostly non-medical people, a caregiver helping them get ready for bed or ready in the morning for the day, medication reminders, helping them with housekeeping. And so we would have an office in the building and then, work with the management. So it seems seamless. You're getting the services, from us. And then that was a good model. There wasn't really anybody else doing that in New York. So then they started to work with the Atria buildings. Atria is like another big national home care provider. In the same setup, they had an office in the building that was staffed with a nurse or two nurses, and they would manage the caregivers that were in the building. So we had probably 30, 40, 50 people on service in any of those buildings. Um, and then and then what happened was the New York came out to do their first survey. They had never come out to survey them for relicensure. That was really backed up. So it was 5.5 years later, something like that. And they showed up at like a post office box store because that was the address they had. So they called very upset and said, well, where are you? And they gave them the address for the Hallmark, and they went there and they explained what they were doing. And they said, okay, well, where are your records? And I said, well, the records for the people that live here are right here, and the records for the people that live in Riverdale are in the office in Riverdale. And so it was a unique situation. So they said, well, the regulations say they all need to be in one place. So so they went and got an office in Midtown Manhattan, and my wife had just gotten done with college and had, loved the idea of living in New York, going to New York, the shows, the park. And I grew up in a small town in New Hampshire. I was not looking to go live in New York. But we would go there on weekends and we would, copy the records and bring them to this new main office. And then we'd go out to dinner with her mom and her business partner. And I'd spend the whole time asking them, like, hey, why aren't you doing this? Or why aren't you doing that? Or, if you did it this way, like, I have any idea. But I've always been very inquisitive. I used to hang out with my older sister and cousins, and I was limited to 21 questions a day. I usually spent at least half of them trying to figure out why they didn't want to hear me asking more questions. So one night, maybe we had been doing this for a few months, and so we had been there a bunch of times. And I asked a question. He said, "Well, we have this office, and there's two offices and a bunch of other room, and why don't you come do it?" And I was working at a mortgage company at the time, and we were doing, no doc loans for janitors for $1 million, 105% equity. So I kind of saw the writing on the wall about the mortgage business. And my dad was in the grocery business his whole life, since he was like 12 to when he retired. And he always said, find a job in an industry that people always need. And, home care, the baby boomers, all of that. Certainly that seemed to fit the bill. I didn't really listen to my dad as much as I should have, but that was one that I picked up on. So my wife and I moved there, and we were living at 43rd between 8th and 9th, right in the middle of Times Square, basically. And our office was down the street, and we started to figure out what we were doing. And then probably maybe very close to when we started, felt like we almost lost our job because the state started to put pressure on the buildings like the Hallmark by Brookdale and the Atria buildings to get licensed on their own. So we were in a bit of a pickle because that was where all of our business came from. So if they got licensed, that would be a problem. And so in New York, there's the system that they use is there's certified home care agencies that can bill Medicare and Medicaid. And then there are licensed home care agencies that can do all of those services but can't actually do the billing. So the certified agencies contract with the licensed agencies to do the care. And so that was the setup. And then the rest of it was like the Medicaid waiver program was run by the city. And there were like 20 contracts. And unless like you were I don't think I was going to say the cousin's, the mayor of the cousin or the cousin's mayor, but I'm not even sure that would have helped you. Anyway, it was hard to get a contract. So so I started to ask about Medicare and Medicaid, and when they were up in Massachusetts, and I think it was 98, they went from fee for service to a capitated rate for Medicare. And I think something like 78% of home care businesses went out of business over the next couple of years.
Explain for an outsider why that had such a significant effect.
Well, for a lot of people, and I know particularly in my mother-in-law's situation, fee for service means every time you go out and do something, you bill for it. So you know what you're billing for, and then you know what your payroll is, and then a capitated rate or episodic payment, or depending on what they call it, is where you get a set amount of money to provide care till the person is out of their episode. So for people that were used to not billing that way, it was a complete change. Also, it meant that you had to be more careful about what you prescribed or what what your plan of care was to make sure there weren't too many visits, or and a lot of places just couldn't handle that. I know in my mother-in-law's case, there was a long time where they just kept doing it the wrong way. I think just like they didn't know any better, and it was a pretty confusing time. So Peter especially was very against Medicare and Medicaid when we were trying to figure out, all right, well, what are we going to do if all these buildings get licensed? And so one of the things, so finally I was working with this guy. They had a certified home care agency and a long-term care agency. And he was the vice president of something. His name was Tim Letty. He was my greatest mentor I ever had in New York. I met him very early on, and we still keep in touch. He's a real big deal now. But anyway, we signed a contract with them to provide care, and I told Pete, like, well, we already did it. I've already told them we're doing it. And so he said, oh, all right. So we started doing it, and things changed. We had a good in with these places. Because we worked in these buildings and people needed other services other than what we were giving them, whether it was skilled care or doctor visits or PT so when we worked with these other providers, they were interested in working with us because not only we were going to be just another provider, we were going to be more of a partner. We're going to be a referral partner. And so we were able to sign, I think, something like 40 contracts to do this. And the first 8 months we were doing it.
Wow.
Our census went from, I don't know, maybe about 100 to like 450, like very quickly. And then Obamacare came and Medicaid redesigned in New York. And so that city program that I was talking about before, they went to a more managed care situation. So they, all the money went to the managed care organizations, and then they could contract with whoever they wanted. So the contracting opened up from, those 20 places that had the contract to whoever they wanted. So we were able to get a contract with just about every MCO that came in. And so then things started to really completely change. But as it turns out, Atria ended up getting licensed. So we stopped working in those buildings. So the transition to doing this was interesting. Um, but one of the things we learned is, do you know what a 202 building is?
No
The first
idea.
time it
What's a
came up,
202 building?
first time it came up in a meeting, there were a bunch of people were in the room, and they were like, "Yeah, so would you be able to do this in a 202 building?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the best places to utilize this type of service would be a 202 building." And then everyone left the room, and I turned to the kid that I was with, and I was like, "Do you know what a 202 building is?" And he was like, "I have no idea. I thought you were going to tell me." So I didn't know, but it's a Section 8 housing for the elderly and disabled.
Okay.
And so a lot of them are set up like an assisted living. Basically, they have a service coordinator that works there. They have to have security. Um, there's a couple other regulations that. So it was essentially like the Hallmark, but instead of paying $8,000 a month to live there, people were paying $600 a month to live there. But what we found is the kind of services they got were if there was 100 people that lived in one of these buildings, they maybe 50 of them would get some sort of home care service, but they would get it from 32 different agencies. So nobody ever knew who was coming and going, or if Mrs. Smith's aide didn't show up, like nobody really knew who to call because you had to go through the list, or you couldn't just send over somebody from Mrs. Jones's room to go help out because you were also working in that room. So we would go to all these places and explain what we did at the Brookdale building and the Atria building, and essentially say, well, we could do that for you. And people would say, well, geez, we don't have any money. And we'd say, well, it doesn't cost anything because, while it is a very nice thing, it's not completely like altruistic. We were making, we were getting clients that way. And then we were also able to get all those MCO contracts because, again, they wanted access to be able to get to the residents in these buildings to promote their services. So it just really worked out. The whole system worked out very well.
And so at what point did you figure out, hey, we've got a model here that is replicable and we should take this to other geographies as well?
Well, I probably thought that much earlier than was really a reality. I'm always maybe one step ahead of where I am in real life in my head. But I don't know, pretty early on, I thought, pretty early on, like I said, we almost lost our jobs like the first year that we worked there because they were, things were going to get licensed. So it was something I put a lot of thought into. My wife and I would talk about it essentially 24/7. We would go home and talk about it, walk to work and talk about it, be at work and talk about it. So I would say probably, around that Medicaid reads 2010, that time about. But we were so busy in New York, we ended up getting, I think our highest census was 1,257. So that was, a lot of work. And anytime I wanted to open up a recruiting office in the Bronx or this in Brooklyn, Peter didn't want to because he didn't have his hands on it. Nobody was going to be there. And so that was sort of hard to convince him. But luckily, there was sort of a kismet moment maybe. But HHA Exchange, they're the computer software that we use for our enterprise system. It keeps track of billing and payroll and your collections module and nursing notes and your EVV, your electronic visit verification, which finally became mandatory this year. I think it was in 2020. Originally, they were going to make it mandatory. I kept pushing it off. But anyway, they're an online-based software system. And they first started back in 2008, maybe. And we worked with one of the companies, one of those certified companies that could bill Medicare and Medicaid. They wanted a way to be able to communicate with their licensed agencies without having to fax or pick up the phone. So this guy, Raphael, was working on the software, which became HHA Exchange. And now I think is the leader across the country in this sort of software. But we used to be able to call him up and be like, Raphael, this isn't how we do things. You got to change it around. And then like the next morning you'd look and it would be different. I think he finally retired and is back in Israel. Good Good for him. I miss him though. I wish I could still call him and tell him to change things someday. But anyway, we had a very good relationship with all of them, and our office was right across from Madison Square Garden, so it was a very easy place to get to. And then when like HHA Exchange, they'd hire new salespeople, they would send them to our office, and so they could see how people used it, and they'd spend the day and hang out. So we were used to sort of doing things like that for them. So they were trying to get the contract to do EVV for Pennsylvania. They were moving to a managed Medicaid system as well. And so
What is EVV?
Electronic visit verification. So when you get to somebody's house, you have to clock in. You either can call from their telephone or you can use a GPS app. But there has to be one of those that links you to their house, both on a clock in and a clock out basis. And I think now the limit, I think they put it out as maybe 85% you need to be at. It's gone up every year. But yeah, so I think I lost my train of thought about electronic visit verification. Oh,
This was something that
they were getting they were trying to get the contract with Pennsylvania. And Pennsylvania wanted one company to do all of it. So they had signed the contract with the state and the two other managed care organizations. And UPMC, the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, they're a behemoth in Pennsylvania. I think they employ over 100,000 people, and they're the biggest employer in the state. So they have a lot of sway in how things turn out. So I guess they wanted to see it live and see somebody using it and how it works. So they invited him to our office, and I think there were 7 people that came, different executives and people putting the plan together. And so they sat around all day and, asked questions and went to different departments. And then at the end of the day, we had like an exit interview, and they finally said sort of the same thing Peter had said to me like almost 10 years ago, like, well, so why don't you go do it? And I was like, well, I've always thought the hardest thing about business is getting somebody to pay you to do something. I think the rest of it you could figure out if you had to. But if nobody's going to pay you to do it, it's not a real business. So I said, well, you guys promise like you'll sign a contract and we'll work together? And they were like, well, yeah, great. And I was like, all right, well, if we're going to get business, sure. I'll try and talk Peter into it. So I finally did. I told him he could own half of it, not have to do anything ever, and just allow me the time to work on it when I needed.
Sounds like a pretty good offer.
Yeah, so it worked out well. We started that in 2017 in Pittsburgh, which was a really great experience. I really enjoy that town. I've gotten to make some great relationships, including the mayor, Ed Gainey. He's a great guy. We met him, actually. Our office was right down the street from, he was a state rep, or I think he was a state rep at the time. And he came back from Harrisburg that day, made it under 2 hours, he said, just to come to our grand opening. Anyway, I stayed in touch with him. He helped me out with another personal situation. Well, it's a whole other story. But anyway, he's a great guy. I liked Pittsburgh a lot. It was our first, like I said, jump into another city and being able to figure out, how we can be there and how we can make sure our culture and the way that we look at things and the way that we operate is left there without being there all the time, which I think was always Peter's underlying issue about opening things at other places. So we figured that out, and that was really great.
So let me ask you this, Philip.
That was not our first independence care, though.
So, it wasn't. So,
no,
just kind of thinking ahead here. I've talked to a lot of home healthcare companies, and it's really common for them to go with a franchise model. Like, hey, we figured out something that works in this location. Let's franchise it. But that's not the approach that you guys took.
No.
Tell us your thought process there.
Well, my wife
easier to sort of hold control, easier to kind of build a culture.
My wife is, I don't want to say control freak because she's not a freak, but my wife likes to have control. And so that was a lot of it. She didn't want, for her, she said if she's not a part of it, she doesn't want her name, she doesn't want her name on it. And to her, that's what a franchise would be. No matter how much you know, looked through the people, and no matter how much you vetted anybody, it just, you never know. And she just wasn't really willing to do it. So,
You guys had figured out a good way to do things. You were building your own culture, your own systems. You wanted to make sure that that remained consistent throughout any new locations that you were going to open up.
right. And, and we also thought, and this, we haven't figured this out yet, and the opportunity hasn't come up, but we also thought, if you find the right person, you can set it up as a franchise really anyway. You find the right person, you do some sort of profit share, everyone's really in the same position, and, you know, um, so I'm in the long term. I think if a situation like that came up, that would be great. Um, because at some point it
So,
is hard to make sure you get to all 30 different places on, you know.
yeah. So, paint a picture for us about what the company looks like today. How many locations, which states, what's going on?
So we are in, I forget all I'm just going to list them out in so I don't have to give you numbers that I'm wrong about, but we're in New Hampshire. We cover basically the whole state. I grew up there, so that is special to me, and my family still lives there. We have 5 locations in Pennsylvania, Kentucky, Indiana, Chicago, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, Idaho, and Arkansas, and Missouri.
That's quite a list.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
And so,
recently,
and so each of these locations is doing roughly the same thing, offering the same kinds of services in the same way.
yeah, there's a couple of outliers. In Kentucky, we have an intellectual disabilities license, so we do a bunch of that. Also, in Arkansas, we have an intellectual disability license. And so we do a little bit of that, but other than that, mostly the rest of it is all the same sort of offerings. Um, you know, non-medical home care, helping with activities of daily living.
Is it mostly senior care, or I know you mentioned those 2 locations that you've got intellectual disability licenses, but in the other locations, is it still mostly senior care, or
Oh
not
yeah,
necessarily?
for sure. Mostly, we do some adolescents and some, but it's mostly mostly 65 and over. I would say about 90%, if not more.
So to get from where you were to where you are now with 30 locations, that's a pretty good growth curve. What was the single most effective growth strategy for you?
Grit, just really just keep moving forward, keep applying, keep looking for the next opportunity. Just keep at it every day. Really, I mean, it's a pretty simple answer, I suppose, but I really think,
Just hard work, nose to the grindstone kind of a thing.
yeah. In research, the places that we're applying for, you know, like we had reasons for the most part to apply to them, some sort of, and ease of entry was actually a big one. The faster we could get in and start providing services and helping people out, the better. Um, I mentioned before I never wanted to live in New York, and I didn't. And I'm glad that I had the experience, and I'm glad that I'm gone. But one of the things it it taught me is that saying we had an office, and there was a security guard right there, and I remember like at least once a week he would yell to me as I walked by, "Hey, remember, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere." Um, and I always thought it was funny, but looking back on it, it's true. And going to other places, New York is just different. Everybody, not everybody, but it's faster paced. It's more aggressive. It's more competitive. It's more, you got to be on your game. And so it has certainly been helpful going to other places, just with different ideas that those areas haven't really heard, or just, bringing sort of a different mindset to what we're doing has been interesting. So in retrospect, I'm glad I had that experience. I think it's been helpful.
Yeah. Make it here, you can make it anywhere. I'd love to hear, Philip, about the mobile health home park concept. What is this and why are you so excited about it?
Oh, well, I so this goes back a long way. I grew up in a town in New Hampshire that had three mobile home parks, and I sort of romanticized them as a kid because everyone had to get on a bus to go there, but then they all got off the bus and they all got to go play football together and they all got to like hang out, and it just seemed real exciting. And then I remember I went to this kid Josh's like 10th birthday, and we had a sleepover, and I just remember thinking like, wow, this is like camping, like everyone's so close, and it just I don't know, it felt really great to me. So for the longest time, I've thought about mobile homes. I was trying to actually find something the other day, and I think I found something from 2009 where it was talking about affordable housing and home care. And some of these issues over the years have just got worse and worse. But the idea was that, housing is hard to build, it's expensive to build, and this is a less expensive way. And having assisted livings at a mobile home park was really the basic idea to begin with. And sometimes it was more of a joke, because people would laugh when I would say it. But anytime I ever drove by a mobile home park, I would point out to whoever I was in the car with, look, that's a perfect example. And then I would repeat the idea about what we should do there with turning it into an assisted living, more or less. And so over the last few years, and probably COVID had a lot to do with this, I would imagine. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but recruiting, if you ask any home care provider, what's your biggest issue? I would imagine it would be recruiting, staffing, you know, keeping caregivers. And so the other part is in the buildings, we worked in New York City, we did a lot of cluster care. So instead of having, and especially with Medicare and Medicaid, they'll get 4 hours a day of service, or sometimes even two. And what happens is somebody goes in, they do something, maybe make them breakfast real quick, and then they both sit down and watch Wheel of Fortune. And then 2.5 hours later, she gets up and the caregiver might, fix her lunch and then, do a load of laundry and leave. And it's not as helpful as it could be. So since we had, people all together, what we would do is if you had 4 or 8 or, however you're going to break it up, or 6 people with 4 hours, instead of somebody sitting there and doing that, you'd have that one person going around. So they're constantly working and they're constantly going around seeing who needs help and what they could be doing. And, people like that, it makes them feel more independent. They don't necessarily have somebody. A lot of people don't like the stigma of somebody sitting there next to them in scrubs or walking down the street. So all of our caregivers wear polo shirts and khaki pants, just because that's the way Lorna taught me a long time ago. And so, where was I?
So this idea is called cluster care.
Right. Yeah. So cluster care. So we did a lot of that, and I thought you can do this. So instead of getting 4 hours, you can get somebody to have 24-hour care, but for the same price, and they're getting the same amount of care because it's not helpful to sit there and stare at somebody or watch TV with them, really.
Yeah, because the provider isn't sitting there the entire time. They're moving around to different locations, people who are nearby and helping them and then coming back. Right. Yeah.
Right. And so, that's another good thing you can do in these mobile homes. And so back in July, we have a home care agency in Arkansas, and I was looking at the website for some reason, and it said that they were reposting this grant bid. And so I immediately thought, well, if they're reposting it, I wonder why. So I read it, and it was for 50 to 60 units of housing for clients who have intellectual disabilities, behavioral health issues, or substance abuse. And they're creating a new level of service. I think it's called independent supportive living therapeutic level 3 or some long name. And so these are for people who have those issues that have already gone through level 1 or level 2, which is a more sort of strict locked facility, what have you. And they're working on getting out and working, like living out independently. And so the idea is they would, go to whatever this place was, and you would help them get jobs, you would help them get back into the community, connect them with therapy services, help them with, whatever daily activities you need. So it was to provide 50 to 60 of units housing for that type of model. And so we put together a plan where originally it was to buy a mobile home park and to put in tiny homes. So that's what we were going to do. And we put in our proposal thinking like, well, there's no way we'll ever win this, but this was a good exercise. And maybe now in the future, like we'll have something, we have a much bigger model now, and we have, things we can show people and, that sort of thing. So I thought it would be helpful anyhow. And then in the middle of September, we found out we won. We got the award. And so that was shocking, but it was a real roller coaster ride because it was very exciting that we got it. But we had used as an example this mobile home park in Camden, Arkansas, which I doubt you have heard of, but it is about an hour and 45 minutes south and a little west of Little Rock, and it's a very small town. Well, I guess it's a city, but right next to it is Highland Industrial Park, which is a 25,000 acre industrial park. It's got like an 8-mile long rocket range. Raytheon is in there. They're just building a new factory to build the Iron Dome missiles. I think they build the Patriot missile there, the Slingshot, some other things, anything that blows up. It used to be a military base, a Navy base back in the 40s and 50s. And then it got decommissioned, and LBJ sold it to, I think, Brown and Root, a company in Texas, which I think was his father-in-law. But then it became Halliburton down the road, so maybe.
So there's a lot of industry nearby.
Yeah. Well, just in that one spot, really. And it's sort of interesting because and if locally it's interesting, nobody else may find it interesting, but the industrial park is in one county. And that county is basically the industrial park. But then everything else is in the other county next door. So they have some weird sharing of resources and stuff because otherwise there's really nothing in these other towns. So anyway, so it's a
right. You need roads, you need sewers, you need places for people to live, hospitals, schools, that kind of
right.
thing. Yeah.
And so they hire a lot of higher end workers over there, but there's really no place. If you're making $100,000, $150,000 a year, there really isn't housing for that market there. So people are either driving back to Little Rock or going, staying 4 days at a hotel and then going back to Mississippi or Texas or wherever they live. So it's an interesting place, I guess, to say the least. But I called up the lady that was selling the mobile home park, and I had talked to her about a month before. And she was actually very excited. She's like, I've actually wanted to turn this into a assisted living. I just, never had the time, and I own some other stuff in town, and blah, blah. So
sorry, Philip, let me interrupt you for a second. So the idea is it's a mobile home park, but each of the individual units is an independent living unit for somebody, and you've got care providers that can go around to all these different units. That's right? So everybody who's living there is getting some sort of care from you.
Well, no, not everybody, and it doesn't have to be that way. I've actually figured out a financial model where you could let people from like the VA or even Medicaid waiver program people live for free, essentially, or very small stipend, so long as you're doing the care. You're still making money, and so long as you don't need to be greedy, it's a good business model, I think. But I think it would be. We'll get there down the road. But for right now, the way that we're doing this one anyway, and as part of this level 3 in the housing, they don't want, and I think it's against the regulations, to like segregate them. You can't make a campus. You can't put them all in the same building. They want them integrated in the community. So in this particular place, well, real quick about this other girl, Brittany, who owned the park. I called her and was like, we're going to buy your mobile home park. And she's like, oh my God, I sold it to somebody last week. And I was like, oh, you can't be serious. And I was devastated. And I was thinking, oh my God, like now we're going to lose out on the grant. And now we're not going to be able to do this. I'm going to fly to Arkansas and change her mind. So I flew to Arkansas and I went to the mobile home park and I started asking people, hey, you know where Brittany is? So then they told me to go up to like the laundromat that she owned or the dry cleaner or whatever it was. And I ran into her husband and he was like, yeah, I really think we have to see this through, but maybe it will fall through. And so I was disappointed. And then I went to, because of that weird thing where it's all in different counties, they have
Yeah.
it's called the Tri-County Economic Development or whatever it's called. And so I went there thinking, well, maybe these people have an idea. And so I talked to James Lee, the guy that runs the place, and he said, well, there's this airport inn for sale up on the main road by the airport. And I had seen it, and it looks like a real dump. And he's like, but it's also got a gas station and a convenience store. And as part of the program that we're doing, we have to create jobs for these for the clients to work in, blah blah blah. So there's a convenience store and a gas station and some other building. And I was like, well, it was interesting. And it was on the way out of town. And so he said, I know a real estate lady I can call, and she can probably meet you there. So I went up over there and walked around. By the time she got there, I'd already realized that project was way over our head. And so when she got there, I told her basically that, so we don't need to look around. But I explained what we were doing and what we were looking for. And she said, all right, well, I might have something for you. And I didn't know this until basically we closed. She used to own the mobile home park that we bought, and she sold it 4 years ago to this mother and a son who, I guess the father died and they used insurance money and bought 14 mobile home parks. And then I think they realized they couldn't keep up 14 mobile home parks. And this is one of them that they were not keeping up, or maybe the one. And so she went to them and said, hey, I think I can get you out of this if you want, blah, blah. So she came back and was like, yeah, I found one for you. And it's neighbors to the Highland Industrial Park, which ultimately has been very helpful. They own a piece of land that's about an acre and a half. They're the biggest landowners in East Camden. They own most of the town, but they own this random 1.5 acre piece of land right in front of the mobile home park. So they also own the water and sewer company. So we've had to deal with them a bunch. So I asked them if we could have that land and we could build a park on it so everybody in town could have access to it, and basketball court and pickleball and some other stuff. And they said, well, we don't sell our land. So anyway, I've been working with this lady there who is actually also on the city council, but the director of business development at Islands. So her name's Janice. She's been extremely helpful. And so I think they're going to do it, actually.
So where
I think they're
does
going to
this
lease.
stand now? Like where is the mobile health home park? Is it opening soon? Here we are, January 31st, 2025, recording this episode.
Yeah, so
What's the
it
status?
should be open for this program in July. They haven't actually completed all of the regulations and the writing out of the program officially. So I think my understanding is they have to wait till the legislature comes back in June, and then they'll approve it and they'll start in July. In the meantime, we are doing a lot of work at the mobile home park. So it's 20 acres, but only 10 of it was developed, and so. There's 42, I think, spaces. So we've gotten rid of 11 of them. Getting rid of a mobile home is an interesting thing to watch. And so we've
And
gotten
you got rid of
of
them just because they're derelict, they're broken down,
right,
they need to be disposed of, or what's the
right,
situation?
yeah, exactly. And we needed space we're getting 10 or 11 brand new 5 bedroom, 4 bath mobile homes for the program. Excuse me. Which will be, dispersed and amongst all the rest of them. And so there were 16, I think, already rented. We're redoing 8 of them. And then And then as people move out, we'll redo the rest of them. So we'll have our first new tenants that started with us moving in, I think tomorrow, February 1st. But in the meantime, we've cleared out the other 10 acres that was there, and have built a road all the way around it. We're going to make that into an RV park. Like I was mentioning, all the people next door that work there and at Highlands, one of the things that some of them get, or a lot of them get, is a $98 a day per diem for housing. So a lot of them are taking that, buying some sort of travel trailer, RV, or whatever, and using that money to pay it off. But the closest place to even keep one of those is like 30 miles away. So our idea is we're going to do that, help ease their problem, but it'll also help sustain our program by bringing some other revenue sources, which was part of the plan originally. So that's going along well. That should actually be open probably March 1st. And then we're doing one other exciting thing up there. We're doing a pilot program within this program for the program. Like the original request was for things that will help with substance abuse and behavioral health issues that are non-pharmaceutical related. And so I have a friend here in Florida who opened a sober living in his backyard, I guess it is, but it's really based along cold plunge. Have you heard about that? I know it's been it's been a big trend recently. People are getting garbage cans to put all their, get cold in.
Yeah, it's supposed to release all sorts of endorphins and feel good chemicals, and kind of be a natural sort of antidepressant.
Right. And I'll be honest, when I first saw it, I thought it was a little goofy, and I was like, okay, well, we should all go in and I can't think it's going to change the world. However, since actually going and seeing a bunch of things, he has these geometric domes that he builds. And then inside it's a sauna, so it gets up to about 120 degrees. So he's got exact protocols, but basically you go in and you get really hot, and then all of them are a little bit different. One of them's got like in the floor, there's barrels that you open up and then you get in them for the cold plunge. There's ones with a pool that sort of you walk in like a zero entry. So they're all a little bit different, but then you go in the water, the cold water, as long as you can stand it. Then you get out and you repeat that. So I've read a lot about it since talking to him and a lot of different studies, and it does seem, I don't know, I understand it. It resets your nervous system. And, a lot of, I think almost all anxiety and behavioral health and substance abuse sort of begin there with your nervous system, if you will. So I can see the logic behind it for sure. So we're going to use that as number one, another revenue source and a job for the people to work at, sort of to open to the public. But also we're going to keep track of their use of it and their progression and see how things go. So I'm really excited.
Is there enough of a population nearby that you think could support the use of this?
Well, we're going to have 50 clients, at any given time, maybe 60. We have 50 beds right now for sure. We're redoing 8 or 9 of them. So if they don't we'll fill those up too. They're a little bit small. I think those are 3 bedrooms. And those people, the goal will be to have them there for 90 days to a year and sort of help them get back into the community. And my goal, East Camden is I think there's 900 people that live in East Camden. And so I would like to see, a lot of these people get back into the community and stay there and build small businesses and, build up the community. Camden, the city right next door, has a population of about 10,000. And maybe it was 15 years ago, the population was around 15, closer to 16, and a paper mill closed. And so the town sort of went backwards, has been going backwards for a while. But there's a lot of room, I think, to build it back up. So I'm hoping these people stick around afterwards.
So you brought this up earlier about the challenges in different kinds of care environments. of finding good folks to work with you, retaining them, recruiting them. You guys are now open in multiple states, multiple locations, and this is all under you. This is all under your umbrella. These aren't, independent franchises. I'm kind of curious what you guys have tried and have seen success with to find good folks. Then once you find them, hold on to them in an industry where there's traditionally a little bit of turnover.
That has certainly been a challenge. So I think number one, being okay with turnover. I know a lot of people don't like that, and maybe it's the wrong way to look at things, but I would rather have somebody who doesn't want to be here, isn't going to be around, isn't really dedicated to what we're doing, and doesn't sort of, see things the same way that we do, and doesn't want to work in that way. I'd rather just know sooner rather than later. And I know Peter used to say, I think Ross Perot, actually, he worked for, used to say this, but eagles don't flock. You have to find them one at a time. And so, I think that's hard, but I think for me, what it's been is, having a relationship with people. Also finding people that haven't been in this business before, I think is helpful, because they don't already either have bad habits or, just a different way of looking at things. Or, when we worked in those buildings, the private pay buildings, when I first started in New York, there wasn't the word no, like we don't do that, didn't exist. So if we didn't do it, we would find somebody who did, and then be like, yeah, here's who we have who does it, sort of thing. Because, these people were used to not being told no, I guess. And what I found is, on the sort of pendulum of, whatever you call it, of like, people on the very high end wealth are very demanding and entitled, and the people on the very other end are also demanding and entitled. So I think it's a continuum that must meet very quickly thereafter. But we kept that, through, even when we're working in these Medicaid places. Like, yeah, if you ask us, we'll do it, or I'll find the answer for you. Because I don't know, with Google, it's not really like I can figure it out. But there are other places, like, people come in and they're like, oh yeah, we don't do that, and I would hear them on the phone and be like, wait, what do you mean we don't do that? Of course we do that, or we can figure it out. And then be like, well, I've worked at 3 other places, none of them did it. So,
kind of like the 202 building. Of course, we can do that in a 202 building. And then, okay, what's
right.
a 202 building? Let's figure it out and put the pieces together afterwards.
That Tim Liddy I was telling you about earlier, one of the first times he talked to me, he said that they needed lactation nurses, and they're having a really hard time. And if I could do that, like, the big bosses would be real impressed. And I was like, oh, what are you talking about? We got 3 or 4 lactation nurses. I was just talking about it yesterday with somebody. And so then I called Lorna. I might have gone home. We actually lived in the same apartment in New York for a long time, and said, like, so what's a lactation consultant? Lactation. And anyway, now I know what it is. And we went and found 2 people that could do it.
Ready, fire, aim. I like it. Yeah, Philip, I've just got one more question for you. But before I ask it, I want to do 2 things. First of all, for everybody listening today, I know that you like today's content. Philip's been a great guest today. Please hit the like, share, follow, subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you continue getting great content like this. Philip, I also want to let people know the best way to get in touch with you or to continue to follow your story. What would that be?
Oh, geez. I guess give me a call or email me. Our website is independencecare.pro. We're not big on social media. I think we have one, but I couldn't tell you what it is.
So independencecare.pro. That's a good way.
I think Elon Musk said if it doesn't make your product better, don't spend any time on it. And I'm not sure how us telling the world how great we are via social media is making us any better. So, but anyway, or you can email me, Philip Viar at independencecare.pro.
Great. We'll include those links in the show notes for folks. So last question for you, Philip. I'm curious to hear about a serious challenge that you've overcome, what that was like getting through it, and some lessons that you learned.
Serious challenge. Well,
something personal, professional, maybe a combination.
Yeah, no, I suppose I have a bunch, but I have been sober for 15 years and 4 months and 4 days, I think it would be. So not that I'm still counting. But back when I first lived in New York, well, actually, even going back before that, I, I don't know how much time we have, but I was adopted. And so I was adopted by my mother's cousin. A long story. My biological father was in jail 10 years before I was born. And my biological mother and him met in a co-ed prison in Massachusetts. A classic American love story. And and so I was born, and my mom was in prison. They let her out to go have the baby. I was born addicted to heroin. I'm sure that was a big struggle. I don't really remember much of it, but so then my mom got her act together, got out of jail. But my dad was in prison for first degree murder. He had gotten life without parole. He was 21, I think. He was driving a getaway car for a couple of his friends who went inside to rob a drugstore. And it was a local neighborhood thing in Jamaica Plain, Boston. And so they knew that these two old guys worked there, and they thought they would just be easy. And turns out one of the old guys' nephew had stepped in for him and swung a mop at the guys, and they shot him. And anyway, so my dad, who was young and I guess a little stubborn, wouldn't plead guilty or anything because, well, he didn't kill anybody, and so why should he, plead guilty of first degree murder? And then he got life in prison. And they used to have furloughs back in Massachusetts. I don't know if you remember when Michael Dukakis ran for president. There was a guy named Willie Horton who had gotten out on one of those furloughs and I think gone to South Carolina and maybe raped a lady. So it came up in one of the presidential debates, and very shortly thereafter, furloughs were canceled. So I used to see him up until I was probably 4 or 5 outside of prison, and then I went to go live in New Jersey with my mom's cousin. She was going to be back in like a couple of weeks. She just had to get some things in order, and then I saw her, I think, when I was 38 the next time or something like that at my grandmother's funeral. So she didn't come back. So my older sister, and I went to New Hampshire to live with Ann and Peter, the people I call my parents now. And then, yeah, so I grew up. So then I grew up in New Hampshire. From there, sort of, the whole thing with my dad. I would talk to him for a while, and then as I got older, I really didn't. And sort of interesting side story. In 2000, he got out of jail for about 18 months. The lower court in Massachusetts overturned his conviction and ordered a new trial because of jury instruction. I guess they compared reasonable doubt to the moral certainty of getting pregnant or having a child, and that was right before Roe versus Wade, where you could get an abortion, and I don't know. So they overturned it. He got out of jail. Was out of jail for 18 months. Had a job, a bank account, a car, stayed out of trouble. Him and I spent a lot of time together during that time. I was in my early 20s, and I was angry at my parents that adopted me, and I was angry at my parents that left me, and I was just angry at everybody. And but I'm also I'm not outwardly angry at people, so I think I took it out on myself mostly. And anyway, so 18 months later, he had to go back to court, and then they said the Supreme Court re-overturned it. And I remember Shawshank Redemption had been on at that point, and I was like, "So are we going to meet by a boat in Mexico, or how's this going to work?" And they gave him a week to turn himself in and get his affairs in order, and he was like, "No, I'm just going to go back and keep doing the next right thing, and eventually it'll work out." And he went back in 2001, and then he didn't get out again. He ended up getting out in 2020, February of 2020, on a compassionate release from Massachusetts. They had finally changed some of the laws, and he had diabetes, so he had both of his feet halfway amputated and one of his fingers. he had like 18 heart attacks in jail before he died, and so he's a type 1 diabetic. Um, he was wasn't going anywhere, and it was just, as liberal as a state as Massachusetts gets a reputation for, dealing with some of those people who would insist that he was a danger to people, and anyway, it was difficult. So then he got out. He went to go live with his brother. COVID happened, so he was basically stuck there. And then he finally got to go live on his own for maybe about a month. And then his brother found him, had an insulin incident, and so he had to go to a nursing home. And he had grown up in Boston. Anybody that still was part of his life lived in Boston. And they couldn't find a nursing home to take him because of his background. So he ended up going to a nursing home out in Western Massachusetts and dying very shortly thereafter. So that was unfortunate, but he was a really great guy in a lot of ways, and just the most optimistic person I've ever met. Everything was always just going to be okay, and anyway, so I had a lot of those feelings in my early 20s, I guess is what I was getting at. And so I as far as drinking goes, I was somebody who, when I drank, I didn't know when it was going to stop, because, it's never good. There's an AA saying, once too many, 1,000's not enough. And I don't know, I really buy into that. And so, when I got to New York, one of the things I did was find a friend who liked to drink and and hang out. So the first year I was there, it didn't seem like a problem. I didn't really, get up, go to work, blah, blah, blah. And then we had our first child, Thaddeus, in September of 2008. And so the first year of his life, was pretty, as far as drinking goes, just to keep with that, there really wasn't too much. And then some crazy story happened in June, and I missed some planes. It was embarrassing. I started to do some things that were just stupid. And so one day my wife came home and said, "Listen, I'm taking Thaddeus and I'm going to Massachusetts, and you can figure your shit out and give me a call." And so I immediately called my best friend in Massachusetts and told him he should come down because we were going to have a great time for 3 days. And then my second call was to my psychiatrist, who I had explored sobriety, I suppose, in the past, and he always said if there was any time I wanted to go, he had a place for me. So I called him, and I went to this place called High Watch Farm up in Connecticut, which I think it was founded by Bill Wilson. He's the guy that started AA, and it was, I think, the first rehab that was focused on the 12 steps. So I ended up going there for 28 days, and it changed my life.
I can see that there's a lot of pain there. I mean, that's a lot of heavy stuff that happened to you when you were younger, and you had
I didn't even get into half of it.
And it sounds like you were saying that, there was a lot of anger there, but you weren't outwardly angry at other people. So you kind of turned that in on yourself. And that led to the drinking. And you found yourself kind of going down a path that wasn't good. You had a family, you had a wife and a kid. And fortunately, your psychologist, your psychiatrist said, "Hey, I got a place that can help you." So you went to this place and changed your life. Was able to help get you back on track, give you a new lease on life.
Yeah. And then when I got back to work, Peter made me, I gave myself the title of Special Assistant to the President. I wasn't really allowed to do anything, unless maybe he asked specifically. And so I actually spent a lot of time making plans for the future and sort of sketching things out. And some ways it was very helpful. But I really had to earn my way back, I guess is what I'm saying. And that took a while. But even after 15 and a half years, sometimes I still suffer the consequences of it.
But look at where you are now.
Oh, yeah.
You got a family, got a successful business. You've been clean for over 15 years. That's got to feel good.
Oh, no, yeah, no, amazing. I always say, like, when we talk about regrets, like, I wouldn't, or people say, oh, what would you change? My son actually asked me that the other day. And I wouldn't change anything, because then I wouldn't be here. And I like being here, and I like what we're doing. And I love my family. And, so, yeah, things are good. It's really been a blessing. And I guess that's part of, I don't know. I feel a real connection to these people we're working with in Arkansas. Even the people that the people we haven't even met yet that are going to be our clients. But just like there's 32 kids that live in this mobile home park, and a lot of them have some sad stories themselves. And so I can see myself in some of them, and I can see us, just helping our clients, but the community as a whole. And it makes me excited to be able to do that.
That's neat. That's so cool when your heart's in an even stronger place like that. It's driving, obviously, the business side of things, the numbers have to work out, but I have to imagine there's an extra incentive to get out of bed every morning because you know that you're helping folks that have been through some rough stuff like yourself.
Yeah. Yeah,
Phil,
for
it's a
sure.
powerful story. I really appreciate you sharing it with us today. I appreciate you being a guest on the Inspired Stories podcast. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. I was trying to live up to the name. I hope I got close.
You hit it out of the park, man. Folks, that's a wrap on another and a very powerful episode of the Inspired Stories podcast. Thanks for being with us today.